now that I've set up my dado stack, I should be ready to run dado along the inside of my tool tote here to create rabbet joinery for the front panels. So this is my tool tote basic body here. I haven't done any shaping yet, so it still looks very kind of bulky and rectilinear. But you can see I have my dovetail joinery here, the bottom of my tote here, the sides here, and now I'm ready to add my front panels. So this tool tote I made specifically to be able to carry around these plastic containers I use for storage in my shop. So it's a little bit oddly proportioned. And my front panels are going to be extra short because I want to be able to access this plastic tote from inside. So I've gone and I've cut my front panels to final dimension. So their final thickness is just going to be 1/2 inch. And then they're also final width, which is however tall I want this front panel to be, plus 1/4 inch for my rabbet joinery. And then the length is the distance between the two shoulders of my dovetails on the bottom here, plus 1/4 inch on each side, so plus 1/2 inch total. I think in this case it was just under 15.5, so this piece here is about 16, just a little bit shy. And then in this case here, I wanted it to come up 3 inches here, so it's about 3.25 inches wide. So now I should be ready to run that dado along the inside of my tool tote here, so that way I can trap these front panels. There's multiple ways to attach front panels. As you might have seen from the demonstration tool totes in the shop, you can just screw them on to the sides like this. Any wider than 4 inches though, and that starts to create structural problems because this front panel is going to continue to expand and contract this way, versus this side panel won't allow for that movement, and eventually this front panel will start to crack. Another alternative will be to use this rabbet joinery. And the reason why I've chosen rabbet joinery is because then I can glue my front panel into the tool tote and only glue partially up the side, so I'll still allow for some movement in this front panel. And then I believe Sean Gillespie, for his intro class, is actually cutting his front panel into multiple slats and leaving gaps between those slats and installing them with half-blind dovetails. So take all of this with a grain of salt, always question everything. This is just one option for your tool tote. Okay, so I've disassembled my tool tote body. And the first thing I did was I know that my rabbet joinery is going to be running along the inside of my tool tote, so I don't want to take any risks that these pieces get flipped around. So I checked out my triangle marking system on the edge of my tool tote, and I clearly labeled the outside versus the inside. So as long as it says out while it's running on the table saw, I know that the inside is face down on the bed. So do that any way you can. You could grab a roll of blue tape and just put some tape where the outside is. That way you just have a sort of a fail-safe method of not getting your pieces accidentally flipped around. The second thing I did was mark out where I'm going to be cutting my dado. So I want it to be 1/4 inch in and 1/4 inch deep. So I just colored in my waist right there. And I'm going to be setting up my blade in my fence so that I'm running this edge along the fence. And the reason for that is that if I was running the opposite edge along the fence here, like this, I'm relying on the fact that these two edges are perfectly parallel, which they might not be. And I'm also giving myself a lot more leverage, so if this piece does happen to get bumped out at all, there's going to be a lot more material that's caught between the blade and the fence, which will be a stronger kickback, versus if I run it just along this edge here. I only have a 1/4 inch of material between the blade and the fence, so that's the safer route. Next, I'm going to try to set the blade height. So I'm going to deliberately set the height to lower than I think it needs to be, because it's always hard to find the exact apex of the turn of these blades. So better to play it safe. And then sneak up on that final depth. And now I just need to set fence. So I'm going to spin the blade so that I have a carbide tooth pointing towards the fence, and I'm going to line it up with my pencil mark. So I have it set to about the right height and about the right location. If I had a test piece, this would be a great use for a test piece because I can't be guaranteed that I set it perfectly. In this case, I'm just going to go for it and hope for the best. That I had to adjust the height a couple times, but I'm pretty happy with where it landed. Now I can run all of my pieces on this same setting. So if I lay out my pieces with the triangle marking system, so a couple things. You'll notice that when I was laying out my dovetails, I left a half tail instead of a half pin on this side, just to give myself plenty of room to have that rabbet joinery without compromising the strength of the wood. And then as I was cutting the pins and tails, I made sure that I stayed well away from the edge of the board. And then for my form, as I was cutting on the table saw, you'll notice that I was using a joiner push block just to evenly apply pressure. Occasionally, if you're cutting through a particularly dense wood or if your dado blades are a bit dull, the blade will actually push the board upwards and you won't get a full depth of cut. So this way I was just ensuring that I got a full depth of cut on the first try. And then I was also using my left hand to push into the fence and forward. So kind of a diagonal pressure to make sure that it stayed locked up against the fence. So now that I've cut the negative part of my joinery, or the female part, now I'm ready to cut the positive part or male part to fit. So I'm going to assemble this again so that way I can start dropping in these front pieces to test the fit.